Bazaar are about to rip out and start again with a huge mechanic for one of their core characters, Jules. Joy is completely changing. Well, maybe completely is a little bit far, but there is a lot of changes coming to Joy, and we're going to dive into them and maybe see what we would do. The Bazaar team always try to innovate and create more design space in their game wherever possible, while doing so making sure there isn't too much to learn, that the learning curve of the game is still well balanced. They always look for these exciting and new aspects to add to their game to make the gameplay feel more fun. And one of the many things that this has brought us is the Joy mechanic for Jules. Now, if you're not caught up on the Bazaar, then A, you're in the right place to do that, so subscribe, like, do all the important things. But also, you should probably check out our Jules Hero preview here on the channel. I'll leave a link to that somewhere. That will give you an introduction as to how Joy works. Pause this video, come back to it after that, and we'll see you in a second. So, everyone here know what Joy is? Great, awesome, great. Now, this came from a couple of posts from Gregory, one of the main designers of the game. He posts items in their Discord every week. Definitely worth joining that to get those. I'll leave a link to that in the description. One week, while I was away actually, he posted about Jules and how Joy is changing. Now we saw some excellent new items for Jules, and we saw that Joy actually has a sort of new display mechanic, at least on the cards. Has its own little color instead of damage, so it looks a little bit more separate from the regular damage items. However, he also wanted to address some of the things that were changing and why. So guess I might as well talk about it. Joy bypasses too many defenses. It skips shields and you can't heal or regen it away. It's too hard to balance, and it needs to interact with at least some defenses. So that rule you see there was an attempt to make it work out. Pure Joy builds are less effective, but we don't like this very much. Now what he's talking about here is their initial attempt to change this. They have made it currently so that Joy is less effective when the enemy is at full health. So, and the number they're sort of playing around with is 50%. So 50% less effective if the enemy is at full health. So in order to combat that as the Jules player, you kind of need to build some sort of damage item so that you can bring them below maximum health, and then your Joy can start ticking along and doing excellent amounts of damage. As the enemy player, though, this means that things like shielding, at least before Joy happens, or at least shielding at some point so that you are definitely full health, but more importantly, healing and regeneration are very, very good counters in this build to Joy, where previously they had done nothing to it. That's a decent idea for balancing. It's definitely a good starting point, and it definitely allows shielding, regen, and healing to all play a part in combating Joy. But it means that Joy builds have to have some other elements in them, and that doesn't necessarily feel good for where they were going with Jules. Jules should be able to, as a chef, just build these food items that dish out Joy and have them work towards winning. That should be enough to let her get that victory. However, something had to change. It couldn't be as it once was. I always praised Joy for its ability to counter or render ineffective the shielding and healing builds, but the counter side to that for someone that doesn't think they're going to be maining Joy like myself is that those things are going to feel very ineffective and useless against Jules, and you might feel useless against Jules. So definitely needed balancing and tweaking of some sort, because at the moment, or at least prior to this change, Joy was just better damage without any of the downsides. For example, if you had an item that was dealing 50 damage every, 1 second, ridiculously overpowered, right? That still won't be able to one-shot an enemy, and if they had a healing item that healed them for 50 healing every second, they would constantly heal that back, and they would never lose. Whereas a Joy item that did 50 Joy every second, if the enemy was still at 100 base health, which is where you start the game at, that's going to kill them in 2 seconds. Healing or not. Bam bam, dead. There is no way of stopping that Joy. Whereas if you're worried about taking damage from damage items, you can buy shielding to protect yourself. You can buy healing to heal against it. You can buy regen to snack yourself up. You can buy armor to apply shields at the beginning of the game. You can even go so far as to get items that make you invincible to taking any sort of damage. But none of those things will work against Jules. So change is definitely coming, but where do we want to go with this? Weirdly enough, when this was sort of announced or released by Gweg, I saw a number of community reactions, first of all being very positive and saying, great idea, good changes, let's see where we can take this, and then recommending some things of their own, some ideas that came to them. Now, this is prevalent in many gaming spaces when patch notes for a show or whatever are released, and the community around it clashes back saying, no, you should do this, you should nerf this, you should buff this, whatever. That's not what's going on here. I am at least relatively aware of the people who are making the comments in the Bazaar server, and they are all good people. They want the game to succeed. They're just having a bash at it, having their applying their own spin to it, letting the developers know what their thoughts are, just in case they want to take any of them along. But mainly they're just having fun and having a go at designing, because why not? This blossomed a number of different ideas. Eating shields, beating shields, but not regen, just straight nerfs to the numbers of Joy, and many more. And this got me thinking, what would I do if I had to come at this new idea of Joy? How would I balance Joy so that defenses worked? And, almost more importantly, because I'm just one person, I'm just the YouTube talky man, what would my community, who are a bunch of strategy and card game nerds across the globe, what would you guys do? So, before I get into any of my ideas, pause the video, after I tell you what to do, pause the video in a second, and comment below if you have any ideas. What would you see Joy do? And then later on you can see if it matched up with what I said, or perhaps it's something that no one has thought of, and maybe the developers will take a look. So, my idea. First things first, let's set some criteria, shall we? The very first one, the most important thing, is that we need to make Joy counterable in some way. Now, counterable is a weird word to choose because we have no net zero fun builds here. There is no sort of seeing on my opponent's build and building to counter them. That's not really a mechanic or a way of playing in the Bazaar. But there are definitely ways you can construct a build so as to be better against certain classes and maybe shore up some defenses where you might be weak. So in the past, we've said if your build is reliant on healing, avoid duels. So we want to have the opportunity now to say, well, my build includes this, so it is strong against duels. Currently, that doesn't exist. That's not an option. So that's something we want to introduce. Secondly, a full Joy build must still be viable. There must still be a way to beat whatever this counteraction is. And thirdly, we don't want any more delays for the game, so I'm not introducing any new mechanics. There might be some slight tweaks to how different things work, but I do not want to bring any new massive overhauls into the game. Now, without massive amounts of work for said new mechanics, and in order to make both healing and shielding better against Joy, I think Gweg and the team have already kind of nailed it. By making Joy less effective when you're at full health, that's a good way to promote those defensive things against duels, but still let it work. And at the end of the day, you can have a full Joy build with a damage item just to poke them underneath. That's okay, but there are almost definitely better ways of doing this. And I think it comes if you pick one. Healing or shielding. One of these will be the sort of counteraction to Joy, and the other one will remain somewhat ineffective against it. We can say that that one performs the action of balancing against Joy. And then because Joy will still be slightly strong against certain builds, we will want to tweak the numbers down just a little bit, small nerfs here and there, just to make sure that damage is definitely still the primary way of murdering your opponent in the Bazaar. Personally, I'm leaning more towards shielding being the counter to duels. Now that might sound weird, because how do shields, like these bits of armor you stick on yourself, counteract Joy? Food, music, entertainment in general, that sort of thing. Well, I have some interesting ideas about how this would work. So, first things first. Until you fill up the enemy health bar with Joy, virtually nothing changes. Your enemy still has a big red health bar, your Joy will tick up it until it meets where their max or their current health is at. So if they have 200 maximum health, and they're down to 100 current health, and you fill them up to 100 joy, that still remains the same as it used to. That mechanic will still be exactly the same. I would just then add a caveat. If the enemy has any shielding, you then need to overtake that shielding bar, and the little yellow or green shielding bar could start ticking up in Jules blue or purple. I'm colorblind, I don't know which colors they actually are. You do, you've seen it before. The little joy bar would then tick over the shielding, and until you'd overtaken the shielding, you haven't yet won. Now, I like this for a couple of reasons, because there are a couple of interesting interactions we can have. First and foremost, it allows something really interesting with shielding builds. Their shields won't deplete. We will start to see some crazy high shield numbers, which means if you are a shield breaking type of build, so i.e. I think it's Dooley has a number of items that when your shields are broken, I think Claw is one of them, it gets stronger. That won't necessarily be useful in this build. So if you're going for that build and you see a Jules using Joy, you'll think, I won't play against them. I'll go fight the Vanessa instead, they're more likely to break my shields. However, if you're playing a Pygmalion build that wants to get big shielding and then hits you hard with said shielding, then this is definitely the build for you to go against, because you know it's not going to interrupt your shielding until much, much later on in the fight. Now, this is slightly counteracted by the fact that your health bar will be depleting underneath your shielding, so that when it comes to the sandstorm will start ticking away your shields as the joy starts to work its way up. This was also part of my design. I didn't want the fight to be going on really, really long, so if you'd built up a lot of shielding, I didn't want Joy to have to spend ages going up both of them, or like deplete the shielding and then go up the health. So I thought it was quite a nice touch to have the Sandstorm be able to just plink away at the shielding before the Joy came up. It was another reason why I didn't go with healing, because healing I find is more effective against the Sandstorm than shielding tends to be. That could just be something that we've just observed from the few games that we see. I don't have all the data, but that's just what I've sort of gathered from watching a few games here and there. So, because we have aid from the Sandstorm, and we do still want shielding to somewhat help counteract Joy, and because it doesn't really make sense that Joy beating someone or playing music for someone would just instantly deplete their armor, I would say that Joy has a 50% rate of depletion against shielding. So if you have 100 shields and Joy is doing 100 joy per second, that's going to be halved to 50 joy per second against those shields. So it would take 2 seconds to deplete all of those shields. You could think of this, if you really want like a lore bit, you could think of this as the person becoming full, becoming unable to move, or in the case of other types of joy and music, being so in awe of the music that they remove the shielding themselves, they put down their armor, their shields, their arms, to stay and listen, or because they physically can't move because they're so full. Now, of course, I did say Joy would also need a slight nerf, because it is still completely countering healing at this point, or at least almost fully countering healing. Healing will still have some usefulness. There are going to be plenty of builds out there that mix joy and damage, especially burning, because there are plenty of items that apply joy and burning. So healing is still kind of useful there, and that's another way that they can start to make healing feel less bad against joy, by having a number of items that apply joy and damage, or joy and burning, because then healing has some sort of use against that sort of build. However, I would still slightly nerf the damage on joy, to make damage the more applicable and more effective way to reduce the enemy's health bar. But Joy has this nice little mechanic where it can bypass some healing, and it's got just completely different ways of stacking up. So there you have it. That is how I would change Joy, but again, remember to let me know how you would change it. And if you are interested in Jules and all of her Joy mechanics, then you want to check out some of her top items here. We've gone through a bunch of these, and this is where you'll want to start. We dig deep into these items and explain how they work, how you might want to use them, and from there, the Bazaar world is your oyster.